You've got to be kidding me. Honey, I sincerely doubt you can afford to even breathe the air in here." The words, dripping with a venomous sweetness, sliced through the hushed, opulent air of Chicago's most prestigious jewelry house on the Magnificent Mile. The black woman, poised and statuesque in a custom-tailored $5,000 Armani suit, didn't even blink. A slow, knowing smile played on her lips. "Is that so?" she murmured, her voice a velvet calm in the storm of prejudice. "Well, this should be interesting. What happens in the next 10 minutes will not just shatter a 2-decade career into 1,000,000 irreparable pieces. It will detonate a $7.2 billion corporate merger with a single devastating phone call and teach an entire generation of the luxury elite a brutal lesson about judging the wrong goddamn person. Before you see how this plays out, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell, because you are not going to want to miss a single second of this. And let me know in the comments below. Have you ever been judged unfairly the second you walked into a room? The manager, Richard Thorne, glided across the marble floor with the predatory grace of a man who had spent 20 years perfecting the art of a dismissive smile. He was the king of this castle, a celebrated district manager whose wall of plaques testified to his ruthless ability to separate the real clients from the window shoppers. His assessment of this woman was instantaneous and, in his mind, infallible. "Good afternoon," he began, the courtesy in his tone as thin as ice on a winter puddle. "Is there something I can direct you to?" The implication was clear. Direct you to the exit. The woman's smile never wavered. Her voice was pure steel wrapped in silk. "I'd like to see the Celestial Collection. I'm looking for a rather significant piece for a 25th anniversary celebration." In a world of genuine luxury, those words should have been a key, unlocking the most secure vaults. Instead, Richard's smile tightened, a barely perceptible flicker of contempt in his eyes. Across the showroom, a junior sales associate named Jessica nervously polished a glass case, her eyes darting between the manager and the woman. She could feel the temperature in the room drop. Mrs. Davenport, a long-time patron dripping in old money and Cartier, paused her examination of a $500,000 sapphire necklace, her curiosity piqued by the unfolding tension. "The Celestial Collection," Richard repeated, his tone laced with a patronizing drawl. He made no move toward the heavily secured, brilliantly lit alcove where the collection resided. "Of course. And what sort of budget did we have in mind for this celebration?" Let's pause and look at this through Jessica's eyes. She's been working here for 2 years, long enough to recognize the ugly, unspoken code, the way Richard physically positioned himself as a barrier between the woman and the high-value pieces, the subtle yet insulting emphasis on budget before beauty, on price before passion. She'd seen this toxic dance before, usually with quieter, less confident customers, who would shrink under his condescending gaze and retreat to the lesser collections. But this woman was different. She wasn't shrinking. She was observing. Mrs. Davenport, a woman so accustomed to deference that she barely noticed it anymore, watched with the analytical gaze of a biologist studying a foreign species. She had never, in her 60 years of patronizing the world's most exclusive establishments, been asked about her budget before being shown the merchandise. A seed of unease began to sprout in her chest. "I believe I asked to see the pieces first," the woman stated, her voice losing none of its calm authority. A stunning, custom-made lapel pin, an intricate design of platinum and diamonds, caught the light as she gestured dismissively towards the celestial display. "The artistry of the piece will determine its value to me, not the other way around." Richard's jaw clenched. This was not going according to his script. Just then, the heavy glass door chimed. announcing the arrival of another customer. Michael Johnson, a sharp young black man in a flawlessly tailored Brioni suit, entered, carrying a briefcase that radiated importance. The security guard, a hulking figure near the entrance, subtly shifted his stance, his attention now divided between the two black customers who had dared to enter this temple of white wealth. "I appreciate your perspective," Richard said, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper, as if he were doing her a favor. "However, you must understand, the pieces in the Celestial Collection begin at $250,000. Perhaps something from our Starlight Collection would be more comfortable for you." The insult, cloaked in the language of customer service, hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Now, let's see it through Mrs. Davenport's eyes. The vague unease she felt had now blossomed into full-blown, uncomfortable certainty. She was witnessing something deeply, profoundly ugly. She, who had never had to justify her presence anywhere, was watching a woman of immense poise and elegance be treated like a common shoplifter. The realization was sickening. Michael, the young attorney who had just entered, froze mid-stride. The air was electric, with a tension he knew all too well. He'd lived this scene in different forms his entire life. The soft-spoken redirection, the polite, yet firm, gatekeeping, the subtle, insidious suggestion that you simply do not belong. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a reminder from a senior partner about an urgent conference call, but he ignored it, his attention completely captured by the slow-motion car crash happening at the main counter. "The Starlight Collection?" the woman repeated, her voice dangerously soft. "And tell me, Richard, what exactly about me suggests that I would be more comfortable there?" The question was a perfectly placed landmine. Richard was cornered, and he knew it. But 20 years of unchallenged bigotry had made him arrogant, sloppy. "I'm merely using my expertise to guide you," he stammered, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. "My goal is to ensure all our clients find something appropriate for their means." The woman reached into her handbag and withdrew a sleek, alligator skin wallet. The movement was slow, deliberate, every eye in the store following her hand. "My means," she said, her eyes locking with his, "are extensive. Would you like me to prove it? Perhaps you'd like to see my Centurion card? Or maybe you'd prefer I call my private banker at Goldman Sachs to vouch for my liquidity." Each word was a hammer blow against Richard's smug certainty. The offer was both a challenge and a trap. His next move would decide everything. Jessica exchanged a wide-eyed, panicked look with her colleague across the room. They were no longer just sales associates. They were witnesses to a corporate reckoning in the making. The store's security cameras, silent and impartial, recorded every angle, every nuance of the impending detonation. The faint strains of a Vivaldi concerto playing over the sound system suddenly seemed mocking, a farcical soundtrack to a scene of profound human ugliness. What Richard said next wouldn't just cost him his job. It would cost his company billions. Richard's gaze flickered from the expensive wallet back to the woman's unyielding face. His decision was made in a heartbeat, born of years of unchecked privilege and a deep-seated belief in his own superiority. He raised his hand in a gesture that was meant to be placating, but was, in fact, profoundly dismissive. "That won't be necessary," he said, his voice oozing a false authority. "I've been in this business for 2 decades. I can tell who is a serious buyer and who is just looking." The words were a lit match tossed into a canyon of gasoline. Let's shift back to Mrs. Davenport. Her discomfort had now morphed into a cold, hard fury. This man, Richard, had catered to her every whim for years, remembering her husband's birthday, her preference for champagne over Prosecco, treating her like a queen. To see him now, revealing the ugly, discriminatory core beneath the polished veneer, was not just shocking. It was a personal betrayal. Without a second thought, she slipped her iPhone from her purse, her thumb hovering over the record button. The woman's composure remained flawless, but there was a subtle shift in her posture. The magnificent lapel pin on her suit seemed to blaze with a new intensity. "I see," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. "So you have determined, based on your 2 decades of expertise, that I am just looking. And this determination is based on what, precisely? The color of my skin?" The question was a grenade, and she had just pulled the pin. Richard's face flushed. He glanced around, suddenly, belatedly aware that they were no longer having a private conversation. Jessica was no longer pretending to clean the display cases. Mrs. Davenport was now openly recording. And Michael, the young lawyer by the door, was watching with an intensity that made Richard's skin crawl. "I'm simply trying to maintain a certain standard of service," he deflected, his voice cracking under the pressure. "We strive to create a positive experience for our actual clients. Ziom, by implying I am not one of them? I never said that. You didn't have to. Now, let's feel what Jessica is feeling." Her stomach was a knot of ice. She had seen Richard do this before, but it had always been more subtle, easier to ignore. Now it was raw, undeniable, and happening in front of a dozen witnesses. A single mother of a biracial child. She knew injustice when she saw it. She had felt its sting in her own life, and the shame of her silent complicity in this moment was a physical weight. The woman took out her own phone, its sleek, carbon fiber case a statement of minimalist wealth. The gesture was calm, methodical, and utterly terrifying. "I think," she said, her voice ringing with clarity, "that this is a conversation that a wider audience might find educational." Richard's face went from red to a pasty white. "Ma'am, you cannot record in here. It is strictly against company policy." "Whose company?" The question, so simple, so direct, was devastating. I beg your pardon?" "I asked," she repeated, enunciating each word with surgical precision. "Whose company? Who owns Chevalier Jewels?" For the first time, Richard's confidence began to visibly crumble. "That would be the Ares Global Luxury Group," he stammered, "but I fail to see the relevance." "Ares Global," the woman repeated, a strange, almost amused light dancing in her eyes. "Interesting. Let's jump to Michael's perspective. He was a mergers and acquisitions attorney. He lived and breathed corporate power dynamics. He knew, with the certainty of a seasoned gladiator, that the entire battlefield had just shifted. This wasn't a disgruntled customer anymore. This was a calculated power play. His phone was buzzing incessantly now, a frantic series of texts from his office. He finally glanced down, and his blood ran cold. The messages were about Ares Global. Mrs. Davenport's phone was now held high, no longer discreet, but a beacon capturing the entire sordid affair. Other customers in the store had abandoned their browsing, drawn into the vortex of raw, escalating drama. Richard, sensing the ground collapsing beneath him, tried to reassert his authority one last fateful time. "Ma'am, if you are not here to make a legitimate purchase, I am going to have to ask you to leave. You are disturbing the other patrons." It was his fatal error. The woman's smile was small, sharp, and terrifying. "Disturbing your patrons?" she echoed, her voice now carrying across the entire showroom. "The same patrons who are now documenting this interaction, the same patrons who are getting a front-row seat to how Chevalier Jewels treats a potential customer who doesn't fit your preferred demographic?" Jessica's hands began to tremble. This was it. This was the moment of explosion. Richard fumbled for the small radio on his belt, his voice a panicked squeak. "Security to the main showroom. We have a situation." The word situation echoed in the silent, cavernous space. It reached every witness, every recording phone, every soul who would later testify to what happened. The woman didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply said, "Yes, Richard, you most certainly do have a situation." Her phone rang, a crisp, professional chime. The name on the screen would have given Richard a fatal heart attack if he could have seen it. Ares Global, board conference line. The storm had just made landfall, and no one was prepared for the tsunami that was about to follow. The woman turned and took a few steps toward the storefront window, her back to Richard, pressing the phone to her ear. Her voice, though lowered, was imbued with a chilling authority that carried just far enough for the spellbound witnesses to hear fragments. "Yes, I'm sure. Scrap the press release for next week. Move the announcement to now. Today." Let's check back in with Michael. He was now staring at his own phone, his face a mask of disbelief. The string of notifications painted a picture that was both impossible and undeniably real. Urgent texts from his senior partner, missed calls from the firm's managing director, and a breaking news alert from the Wall Street Journal that made his heart hammer against his ribs. Ares Global announces hostile takeover of rival luxury conglomerate in $7.2 billion deal. Dr. Evelyn Reed appointed new CEO. The phone in his hand suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The woman on the phone was Dr. Evelyn Reed. The new CEO, his new CEO. Richard, oblivious to the corporate earthquake shaking the very foundations of his world, watched Dr. Reed's retreat as a victory. The problem was walking away. He turned back to Mrs. Davenport, his professional smile snapping back into place like a grotesque mask. "Now, Mrs. Davenport," he oozed, "about that stunning sapphire." But Mrs. Davenport wasn't looking at the sapphires. Her gaze, like everyone else's, was locked on Dr. Reed, who stood silhouetted against the Chicago skyline, speaking in the rapid-fire, decisive language of someone who moves markets and topples empires for a living. "Actually, Richard," Mrs. Davenport said, her voice dripping with ice, "I believe I'll wait and see how this situation resolves itself." Jessica, emboldened by the shifting power dynamic, stepped forward. "Richard, maybe we should just—" "Should what, Jessica?" he snapped, his authority resurfacing in the face of a challenge from a subordinate. He lowered his voice to a hiss, meant only for her. "Handle a woman who was clearly wasting our time? She couldn't afford a single link on one of these bracelets." The words were quiet, but in the pin-drop silence of the showroom, they carried. Dr. Reed ended her call and turned back, her movements deliberate, measured. She moved with the serene confidence of a chess master who had just placed her opponent in an inescapable checkmate. "Richard," she began, her voice calm but with a new, hard edge that made his shoulders involuntarily tighten. "We need to continue our conversation." "There's nothing more to discuss," he blustered. "I've explained our store policy." "Your policy?" Dr. Reed nodded, a thoughtful, almost predatory look in her eye. "Tell me, Richard, in your 20 years at this flagship store, how many black clients have you personally sold a piece from the Celestial Collection to?" The question was a sniper's bullet, precise and lethal. Richard's face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions: confusion, indignation, and finally, defensive rage. I don't keep records of that nature. That's an inappropriate question. We treat all our customers with equal respect." "Do you?" Dr. Reed's gaze swept across the room, acknowledging every witness, every recording phone, every security camera. "Because I do keep records, and I've been documenting some very interesting patterns." She produced a slim tablet from her briefcase, its screen glowing to life, revealing what looked like a meticulously compiled dossier of dates, times, and verbatim quotes. Let's see this from Jessica's perspective. Her blood ran cold. She recognized some of the dates on the screen. She remembered the incidents Dr. Reed was alluding to. A wealthy Middle Eastern couple steered away from the diamond solitaires. A successful Asian entrepreneur treated with suspicion. Moments she had buried deep. Moments of discomfort she had never dared to challenge. To see them laid bare, catalogued as evidence, filled her with a potent cocktail of nausea and a strange, terrifying hope. The world was about to change. "You've been documenting?" Richard's voice was a strangled squeak. "Market research, Doctor." Reed corrected him smoothly. "I am a firm believer in due diligence before making any significant acquisitions." Michael stepped closer now, the legal implications of what was happening hitting him like a tidal wave. This wasn't just a complaint. This was a case, a landmark case. "Ma'am," he said, his voice filled with professional awe. "As a lawyer, I have to ask, what are you planning to do with this documentation?" Dr. Reed's gaze met his, and for the first time, a flicker of a genuine smile touched her lips. "That depends entirely on what happens in the next 5 minutes." Richard, finally sensing the true depth of his peril, made a last, desperate move. "Security!" he yelled, his voice shrill with panic. "Escort this woman out. She is harassing my staff and my clients." But the security guard, who had been listening intently, didn't move. He looked from his manager's panicked face to the woman's unshakable calm, at her tablet of evidence, at the growing crowd of witnesses. He understood, with the primal instinct of a man who knows a losing battle when he sees one, that this was no ordinary disturbance. "Before they do that, Richard," Dr. Reed said, her voice cutting through his panic, "perhaps you'd like to see this." She swiped the tablet to a new screen. It was an email chain. The sender's address was clearly visible, r.thornechevalierjewels.com. The subject line read, "Managing Client Profile." The body of the email was damning. "We need to be more proactive in protecting the brand's image. Our focus must remain on our core demographic and discourage off-brand traffic." The email was dated 3 weeks ago. Richard's face became a ghastly shade of gray. That's taken out of context," he stammered, his defense pathetic and weak. "Is it?" Dr. Reed scrolled down, revealing Richard's reply to a company-wide memo about a new diversity and inclusion initiative. His words glowed on the screen like a neon sign of bigotry. "While I appreciate the sentiment, we cannot afford to sacrifice our aspirational brand identity for the sake of a social experiment." A collective gasp rippled through the store. Mrs. Davenport's jaw dropped. Jessica physically recoiled, covering her mouth with her hand. Michael's professional curiosity had now become a deeply personal, visceral investment. Even the security guard looked disgusted. The customers who had been browsing were now a silent, impromptu jury, their faces a mixture of shock and outrage. Dr. Reed's phone chimed with an alert. She glanced at it, her expression hardening with purpose. "That's my cue," she said, looking directly at Richard, her eyes like polished obsidian. "I have a board meeting that started 2 minutes ago, a rather urgent meeting about the future of this company." "This company?" Richard's voice was a barely audible whisper. "Oh, did I forget to mention?" Dr. Reed's magnificent lapel pin seemed to pulse with light as she adjusted her suit jacket. "My name is Dr. Evelyn Reed, and as of 9 a.m. this morning, I am the new CEO of Ares Global Luxury Group, which means, Richard, I am your boss." The silence that followed was so absolute, so profound, that you could hear the frantic beating of Richard Thorne's heart. It was the sound of a world ending. The collective intake of breath was sharp and audible. Mrs. Davenport's iPhone nearly slipped from her perfectly manicured fingers. Jessica felt her knees buckle, grabbing onto the glass counter to keep from falling. Michael's jaw was on the floor, his mind furiously recalibrating everything he thought he knew about corporate power. The security guard took an involuntary step backward, as if struck by a physical force. The Vivaldi concerto on the store's sound system seemed to mock the scene, a light, airy tune playing over the soundtrack of a man's professional execution. Richard's face was a horrifying tableau of disbelief, denial, and the slow, creeping dawn of absolute terror. That's not possible," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. Dr. Reed reached into her jacket and produced a corporate ID card, placing it gently on the counter for all to see. The Ares Global logo, her photograph, and the title, stark and undeniable, Chief Executive Officer. "I've been the acting CEO for the past 90 days, pending the finalization of the merger," she said, her tone now conversational, as if discussing the weather. "The board of directors decided the company needed a new vision, one focused on ethical expansion and 21st century realities." The revelation was a bomb that restructured reality for every single person in that room. Let's see this through Michael's eyes again. He had witnessed hostile takeovers, boardroom purges, and corporate restructurings that were the stuff of legend, but he had never, ever seen anything like this. A CEO, on the day her appointment was announced, conducting a real-time undercover sting operation on her own company's discriminatory practices while simultaneously being discriminated against. It was audacious. It was brilliant. It was terrifying. Jessica looked from Richard's ashen face to Dr. Reed's calm, commanding presence, and then to the ID card that was a death warrant for the old way of doing things. Her entire professional world was being rebuilt, brick by painful brick, right before her eyes. Dr. Reed continued, her voice steady and implacable. "The board meeting I am currently on, Richard, is to present my final findings from a 6-month multi-city investigation into systemic discrimination and revenue loss across all Chevalier properties." She picked up her phone, turning the screen so the gathered crowd could see it. The display read, "Conference call, Ares Global Board of Directors, emergency session." "And you, Richard," she said, her voice now carrying the full, crushing weight of her executive authority, "are about to become Exhibit A in a very compelling presentation about the urgent need for a new corporate culture." Her thumb hovered over the speakerphone button. "But before I begin, I think it's important that our witnesses here understand the full scope of what they have just participated in. This wasn't just about bad service. This was about a cancer that has been killing this company from the inside out. The power dynamic had not just shifted. It had been completely and irrevocably inverted. The reckoning was no longer coming. It was here." Dr. Reed pressed the speaker button. The disembodied, powerful voices of the Ares Global Board of Directors suddenly filled the hushed opulence of the Chevalier showroom. "Dr. Reed, we can hear you. The board is assembled. We are ready for your final report and recommendations on the Chevalier cultural audit." The voice belonged to Chairman Thompson, a legendary figure in global finance, and his tone was crisp. No nonsense. The words were a death sentence. Richard Thorne looked as if he might faint. Jessica held the counter in a white-knuckled grip. Mrs. Davenport's phone, still recording, captured the moment for posterity, documenting the surreal intersection of high fashion, high finance, and raw, unadulterated justice. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," Dr. Reed responded, her voice clear and commanding. "My audit is, as of this moment, complete. I have 6 months of comprehensive evidence, video, audio, and internal communications, proving a deeply embedded pattern of racial and socioeconomic bias across 17 Chevalier properties. Let's feel this through Jessica's soul. Every time she had bitten her tongue, Every time she had looked away from an uncomfortable interaction, every moment of silent complicity was now part of a CEO's official report. The shame was immense, but it was being eclipsed by a dawning, terrifying sense of hope. The secrets were out. Furthermore, Dr. Reed continued, I have just concluded a real-time field test at our Chicago flagship. The discriminatory practices were not only confirmed, but they were performed by the store's most celebrated manager in full view of multiple customers and the store's own surveillance systems. She gestured elegantly toward Mrs. Davenport's phone and then up at the discreet dome camera on the ceiling. Chairman Thompson's voice crackled with disbelief and fury. Are you telling us, Dr. Reed, that you were personally subjected to this behavior at our own store? By the store manager, Richard Thorne, she confirmed, a man with a 20-year career lauded for his performance. His actions today were not an anomaly. They were the perfect embodiment of a corporate culture we have negligently allowed to fester. Richard tried to speak, to defend himself, but only a choked gurgle escaped his lips. Dr. Reed swiped her tablet, displaying more evidence for the horrified onlookers. Internal emails discussing client profiling, memos resisting diversity training, a documented history of complaints from minority customers that had been systematically ignored. Back to Michael's perspective. The legal dominoes were falling in his mind, a deafening crash. This wasn't just a PR nightmare or a human resources issue. This was a clear violation of the Civil Rights Act. It was a potential class action lawsuit that could cost the company hundreds of millions. It was a case study in corporate malfeasance that would be taught in law schools for decades. Dr. Reed hadn't just caught a racist manager. She had built an ironclad legal case against her own company to force its transformation. The chairman's voice boomed from the speaker. Dr. Reed, what are your recommendations? Her response was instant, decisive, and ruthless. First, immediate termination of any and all personnel who have been documented engaging in or enabling discriminatory practices. Second, a complete, top-to-bottom overhaul of our hiring and training protocols to be implemented by a third-party ethics consultant. Third, the establishment of a new, independently monitored customer complaint system with real consequences. She paused, her eyes locking onto Richard's. And fourth, immediate severance of our partnership with the Sterling Diamond Consortium. Their corporate culture is as toxic as ours was. Let's talk about that. It was the voice of the CFO. That exclusive contract with Sterling was valued at $1.2 billion annually. Terminating it will have consequences. Not terminating it will have bigger ones, Dr. Reed countered, without missing a beat. The long-term cost of bigotry is always higher than the short-term cost of doing the right thing. I recommend we absorb the loss and issue a public statement explaining why. We will make more money being a leader in ethics than we ever did by being complicit in exclusion. The sheer scale of the numbers, 1.2 billion, hung in the air, a stunning testament to the economic consequences of prejudice. Richard finally found his voice, a pathetic, desperate plea. You can't do this. One misunderstanding can't... One misunderstanding? Dr. Reed's eyebrows arched. Richard, shall I play the audio from my interactions at our stores in Beverly Hills, Dallas, and Miami? Or would you prefer I read from your personnel file, which details 3 prior complaints of a similar nature that were quietly buried by your previous supervisor? The evidence was a tidal wave, and Richard was drowning. Just then, Jessica stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. Dr. Williams. She's right. I've seen it happen. I never spoke up, and I am ashamed of that, but I saw it. I will testify to it. Her courage was contagious. Another sales associate, standing near the back, nodded in agreement. The dam of complicit silence had broken. Chairman Thompson's voice cut through the air like a gavel. Dr. Reed, you have the board's unanimous and unconditional support. Implement any and all changes you deem necessary, immediately. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Reed nodded, her expression grimly satisfied. The changes begin now, starting with new leadership at this location. She turned her gaze to Jessica. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Jessica Martinez. Ms. Martinez, your courage in speaking the truth, even when it was difficult, demonstrates the kind of character this company desperately needs. Effective immediately, you are the new interim manager of this store. Another collective gasp. Jessica's face went white, her eyes wide with shock. "Oh!" Davenport let out an audible cry of delight. Michael couldn't help but break into a wide grin. The security guard nodded his head in solemn approval. In a single, stunning moment, Richard Thorne's world had been dismantled and handed to the very woman he had intimidated and belittled for years. The actions we take today, Dr. Reed announced to the room and to her board of directors, will be a clear message to the entire luxury industry. The era of exclusion is over. Discrimination is not just morally bankrupt, it is a catastrophic business model. The old guard is finished. The conference call continued, a surreal symphony of corporate restructuring conducted by Dr. Reed from the floor of the very store she was purging. Her voice was calm, yet unyielding, as she dismantled a 2-decade-old power structure in a matter of minutes. "Richard Thorne," she stated, the words echoing both in the showroom and through the speakerphone to the highest echelons of the company. "Your employment with Ares Global and all its subsidiaries is terminated, effective immediately. Your history of discriminatory practices represents a significant legal and financial liability to this corporation. Security will escort you from the premises." The finality was brutal. A 20-year career, a kingdom built on prejudice, erased in a single sentence. Let's look through Mrs. Davenport's eyes. As a doyenne of Chicago's elite, she had seen fortunes made and lost, careers rise and fall. But she had never witnessed a corporate execution so swift, so public, and so profoundly just. Her phone was still recording, capturing the image of Richard's face as the last vestiges of his authority crumbled to dust. He was no longer a powerful manager. He was a disgraced, unemployed man, forever immortalized in a viral video as the face of corporate bigotry. In a last, desperate gasp of defiance, Richard sneered, "This is a setup. You can't entrap your own employees." Dr. Reed's response was a masterclass in controlled, devastating precision. "Richard, I walked into this store as a prospective customer. I expressed a clear interest in purchasing our most exclusive merchandise. Your reaction, your immediate, condescending, and racially motivated dismissal of me as a legitimate client, was not entrapment. It was a reflection of your character. You entrapped yourself." She then pivoted, addressing both the rapt audience in the store and the board members on the call. This 6-month audit was never about catching individuals. It was about diagnosing a sickness in our corporate culture. It was about understanding why our stated values of inclusivity and excellence were a complete fiction on the showroom floor. The diagnosis is now clear. The sickness was a leadership that tolerated, and in some cases, encouraged this kind of behavior. Chairman Thompson's voice boomed from the phone. "Dr. Reed, what are the next operational steps?" Dr. Reed's lapel pin, the same one Richard had failed to see as a symbol of power, glinted under the lights. "Jessica Martinez will take immediate control of this store. And Mr. Michael Johnson," she said, nodding towards the stunned lawyer who had been a silent witness. "I believe your firm is on retainer with Ares Global. I would like you to personally join my transition team. We are going to write a new, industry-wide playbook for anti-discrimination policy." Michael's eyes widened in astonishment. Yes, of course, Dr. Reed, absolutely." Now, Let's feel what Jessica is feeling. An hour ago, she was a low-level associate earning just enough to support her son, living in fear of her manager's moods. Now, she was the manager of a flagship store on the Magnificent Mile, with a direct mandate from the CEO to lead a cultural revolution. It was the most terrifying and exhilarating moment of her life. Dr. Reed continued her systematic reinvention of the company. All global staff will begin mandatory, intensive, anti-bias training next Monday. We are rewriting our customer service protocols from the ground up. Accountability will be swift and transparent. She then spoke directly to the remaining staff in the store. From this moment forward, every single person who walks through those doors is to be treated as our most valued client. Their interest and their questions will be your only guide. Period. The security guard, who had been called to remove Dr. Reed, now stood at respectful attention, understanding that he was witnessing the birth of a new era. Richard, as he was being led toward the door, made one final pathetic attempt to reframe his downfall. "You've ruined my life over some woke, politically correct nonsense." The words, so revealing of his complete failure to understand what had just happened, hung in the air. Dr. Reed's reply was quiet, final, and heard by everyone. "Your life is ruined because you used your power to systematically dehumanize people based on the color of their skin. That is not a political issue, Richard. It is a matter of basic human decency. And as it turns out, it's also very, very bad for business. And to all of you watching, what do you think? Was this justice? Or was this a public humiliation that went too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. We're building a community here dedicated to calling out injustice and celebrating moments like this. As the security guard led a shell-shocked Richard Thorne out the door and into personal and professional oblivion, the atmosphere inside Chevalier Jules underwent a seismic shift. The suffocating tension evaporated, replaced by a nervous yet palpable current of constructive energy. This was no longer a crime scene. It was a construction site. Dr. Evelyn Reed moved through the space not as a conquering general, but as a master architect, already visualizing the new structure she would build on the ruins of the old one. "Jessica," she said, her voice warm but firm as she approached the still-stunned new interim manager. "Your first task is to assemble the team. We need a meeting in 1 hour. The message is simple. The past is over. Today we begin the work of becoming the company we always pretended to be." Jessica, still reeling from the sudden, dramatic vertigo of her new reality, nodded. "Dr. Reed, how do we even start? How do we change a culture that's been poisoned for years?" Dr. Reed placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Her smile was genuine, devoid of the corporate artifice Richard had perfected. "We start with one conversation, one customer, one moment of genuine connection. We unlearn the bad habits the same way we learned them, through repetition, reinforcement, and unwavering accountability. Let's look at this through Mrs. Davenport's eyes." She had stopped recording. The drama was over. The real work was beginning. She was witnessing something far more profound than a corporate firing. She was watching the birth of a new philosophy, the practical hands-on application of justice. This was not just punishment, it was rehabilitation. Dr. Reed addressed the remaining sales associates, who were gathered in a wide-eyed, silent cluster. "Your performance reviews will no longer be based solely on sales volume. We are introducing new metrics, customer satisfaction scores from a diverse range of clients, repeat business, and peer reviews based on collaborative, respectful behavior. We are going to reward empathy and integrity as much as we reward salesmanship. Michael, his lawyer's mind racing, approached them. Dr. Reed, what you've done here is revolutionary. The documentation, the real-time intervention, the immediate implementation of corrective measures with witnesses present. This is a legal and ethical blueprint. This could be used to reform institutional bias in banking, real estate, healthcare. That is precisely the plan, Mr. Johnson, she confirmed, a glint in her eye. Luxury retail is just the appetizer. She pulled out her tablet again, but this time it wasn't displaying Richard's emails. It was showing market data, demographic shifts, and sociological studies on consumer behavior. The world has changed. The geography of wealth is no longer confined to a few select zip codes or a single skin color. The behavior we saw here today isn't just morally repugnant, it is economic suicide. We were actively alienating our own future growth market. From Jessica's point of view, this was a revelation. She was not just being asked to manage a store, she was being invited to be on the front lines of a massive, industry-shaping business pivot. The weight of the responsibility was immense, but for the first time in her career, it felt purposeful. We are launching a new hiring initiative, Dr. Reed continued, her voice resonating with visionary zeal. We will be actively recruiting from HBCUs, from international business schools, from communities that have been historically underrepresented in this industry. We need people who look like the world, not like a 1950s country club. She then turned to Mrs. Davenport. Your video, Mrs. Davenport, is going to be a powerful tool, not for shaming, but for teaching. We're creating a coalition of consumers who will hold luxury brands accountable. Your voice in that coalition would be invaluable. Mrs. Davenport, a woman who had spent decades serving on charity boards, instantly understood. This was a new kind of philanthropy. I have a rather extensive network of friends who are tired of the old way of doing things, she said, a new fire in her eyes. Consider me your first member. The store was no longer just a store. It was a laboratory for a new kind of capitalism. Dr. Reed's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and smiled. Our communications team has just released the official statement to the press. It details the termination of Mr. Thorne, the appointment of Ms. Martinez, and our new company-wide Inclusive Excellence initiative. By the time the markets open tomorrow, every one of our competitors will know that the game has changed. The remaining staff looked at Jessica, their new boss, with a mixture of awe and hope. The fear that had been their constant companion under Richard's reign was gone, replaced by a sense of shared purpose. Dr. Reed walked over to the Celestial Collection, the sparkling jewels in their case now symbols of a battle won. She addressed Jessica, but her words were for everyone. These pieces are not just expensive rocks. They are symbols of human achievement, of artistry, of celebrating life's most precious moments. Our job is to make that celebration accessible to every single person who has earned the right to participate in it. Let their passion be your guide, not your prejudice. Jessica nodded, her confidence finally catching up to her new title. Dr. Reed, what's the ultimate measure of success? How will we know we've truly changed? We'll know, Doctor, Reed said, a soft smile on her face. When a young woman of color can walk through those doors, ask to see our finest piece, and the only thought that enters our employees' minds is, this is going to be a wonderful sale. The revolution had begun. 6 weeks later, the Chevalier Jewels flagship on the Magnificent Mile was a different world. The light from the crystal chandeliers seemed warmer, the air lighter. The hushed, intimidating silence had been replaced by a pleasant, energetic buzz of conversation and commerce. Jessica Martinez stood near the entrance, not as a nervous gatekeeper, but as a gracious host. The title of interim manager had been made permanent, and she wore her new authority with an easy, earned confidence. The sales figures on her tablet told a story that was sending shockwaves through the industry. Overall revenue was up an astonishing 42%. But more importantly, sales to new clients, clients from demographics that had previously been invisible to the company, had skyrocketed by over 300%. Customer satisfaction surveys, which had been abysmal, now showed a 98% approval rating. Mrs. Davenport entered, not alone as she used to, but with a group of friends, a diverse collection of Chicago's most influential women. Her viral video, which Dr. Reed's team had strategically leaked, had become a defining cultural moment, a masterclass in corporate accountability that was now being studied at Harvard Business School. "Jessica, my dear," Mrs. Davenport called out, her greeting as warm and genuine as a family reunion. "I've brought some friends who are very eager to experience the new Chevalier." The interaction was effortless, authentic, and utterly devoid of the toxic calculus of prejudice. Jessica greeted the women with a warmth that was not in any training manual. It was the natural result of working in an environment of respect and pride. Dr. Evelyn Reed entered quietly, unannounced. The staff who saw her greeted her not with the fear due a CEO, but with the genuine affection reserved for a true leader. Jessica saw her and beamed. "Dr. Reed, you're just in time. I wanted to show you the latest comment from our online feedback portal." She handed Dr. Reed her tablet. The comment was from a young black woman. "I came into your store terrified, expecting to be ignored or insulted like I have been at so many other luxury shops. Instead, I was treated like a queen. I spent more than I planned, and I have never felt happier doing it. You have a customer for life." Just then, Michael Johnson walked in. He was now a permanent member of Ares Global's in-house legal team, heading up their new corporate ethics and social responsibility division. He was no longer just a witness. He was a key architect of the new industry standard. "The ripple effect is staggering," he reported to Dr. Reed, his voice filled with excitement. "Bulgari and Van Cleef & Arpels both announced they are adopting our Inclusive Excellence training model. The National Retail Federation is creating a new set of best practice guidelines based on our policies. We didn't just clean our own house, we've forced the entire neighborhood to renovate." Dr. Reed nodded, her expression one of deep satisfaction. That was always the goal. True change is never isolated. It must be systemic. The proof of this new culture was everywhere. It was in the way a young couple, dressed in jeans and hoodies, were being shown six-figure engagement rings with the same enthusiasm as a wealthy socialite. It was in the easy, collaborative conversations between staff members who now worked as a team rather than as competing sharks. It was in the simple, profound reality that the value of the customer was no longer being judged by the color of their skin or the brand of their handbag, but by the content of their character and the sincerity of their interest. Sarah observed it all from a distance, her lapel pin catching the light. That pin had become an icon within the company, a symbol of a leader who didn't just sit in a boardroom, but walked the floor, who didn't just issue memos, but who embodied the change she demanded. Jessica approached her with the day's final report. "Dr. Reed, we've broken another daily sales record, but I think this is more important." She pointed to a different metric on the report. Employee turnover was down 80%. "People are staying," Jessica said, her voice thick with emotion. "They are proud to work here now." "When you align a company's financial goals with its moral values," Dr. Reed replied, "profitability becomes a byproduct of purpose. Success is not just sustainable, it is meaningful." Their conversation was interrupted by a round of spontaneous applause from across the room. Mrs. Davenport's friends were celebrating a purchase, their faces alight with the joy of a truly positive experience. The sound was more than just a celebration of a sale. It was the sound of a promise kept. As Dr. Reed prepared to leave, she paused by the Celestial Collection, the place where it had all begun. The magnificent diamonds and sapphires glittered as beautiful as ever. But now their brilliance was no longer a cold, exclusive fire. It was a warm, welcoming light, accessible to anyone who dreamed of reaching for the stars. The revolution was no longer just a plan. It was a living, breathing, and highly profitable reality. 1 year later, the grand ballroom of the New York Hilton is packed to overflowing. Dr. Evelyn Reed stands at the podium, the keynote speaker at the World Retail Congress. The title of her address is projected on massive screens behind her. The Dignity Dividend: How Inclusive Capitalism is Reshaping a $1 trillion Industry. The screens flash with hard data, with graphs and charts that paint an undeniable picture. Ares Global's stock price has soared by 60%. The Chevalier brand, once seen as stuffy and archaic, is now the most admired luxury brand among millennials and Gen Z. The inclusive excellence model has been adopted by over 200 retail brands across the globe. The incident that took place in our Chicago store was not an aberration, Dr. Reed tells the thousands of rapt executives. Discriminatory behavior was the industry's dirty little secret. The only thing that made that day different was that we decided to treat it not as a PR crisis to be managed, but as a moral and economic cancer to be cured. In the audience, Jessica Martinez, now the Vice President of North American Operations for Chevalier, watches with tears in her eyes. Beside her sits Michael Johnson, whose legal framework for corporate accountability is now being taught at Yale Law School. In the front row, Mrs. Davenport, now the head of a powerful consumer advocacy group, nods in agreement. We have proven, Dr. Reed continues, her voice ringing with the authority of a leader who has not just talked the talk, but has walked the walk, that the most powerful brand differentiator in the 21st century is not exclusivity. It is respect. The question is no longer whether you can afford to be inclusive. The question is, in this new world, can you possibly afford not to be? She clicks to her final slide. It's not a graph or a chart. It's a simple question in bold white letters on a black screen. What are you going to do? The standing ovation is thunderous, a roar of approval that is not just for a brilliant speech, but for a fundamental shift in a global industry. A shift that began with one woman's quiet refusal to be devalued. As the applause finally begins to fade, Dr. Reed leans back into the microphone for her final words. To every single person watching this, either in this room or online, I want you to hear me. If you see injustice in your workplace, in a store, in your community, document it. If you have the power to speak up, use your voice. If you are in a position to enact change, have the courage to act. Because change doesn't start in a boardroom, it starts in the human heart. It starts with the simple, revolutionary belief that every person has a right to be treated with dignity. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please share it, subscribe to the channel, and in the comments below, tell us about a time you saw someone stand up and make a difference, because this is how we change the world. Not all at once, but one moment of courage at a time.